So in the last video, we talked about the app services overview and deployment an app service. So app service where Microsoft will manage an operating system and a web server. It could be of an IIS or an Atomcat or whatever we call this in JBoss, like something like that, based on the web server requirement. So for every app service, Microsoft will provide an FQDN name. It is like abcd.azurewebsites.net. So it creates one name and assigns a public IP, something like a 20.10.10.10, something, and creates a DNS record and points to that. So immediately this particular application or app and deploys the sample application. So now we want to have our own application. So we want to have our own application. Now, when we create an app service, so by default, so the advantage of an app service is, so we don't need to manage the operating system and whatever the web servers and everything. So we can simply deploy the code and we can do that. Now, how do we deploy the code now? So we don't have access to the operating system. We don't have access to the web servers. And we don't have a control on these things. Now, how do we deploy this code? So now in order to deploy this code, there are various methods provided by Microsoft. The first method is an FTPS. So by default, FTPS is disabled. So by default, it will be in disabled mode. So we need to enable this in order to deploy this code. So what happens here is so Microsoft, so we can enable an FTPS and Microsoft will provide an URL, an FTPS URL, and we can have a username and password created through which we can use any kind of an FTPS client to push the code or application code to the app service. Now we have some kind of a code, a builds or some kind of a project code or a project, we can call it as a files. So which needs to go into the web server. In order to have our application, so we need to copy these files into the web server. Now, one of the method, as I discussed, it will be an FTPS. So you can use an FTPS client and we can do that. Second option is in project repositories. We can call it as a source code repositories. So developers will use tools like a Git, a GitHub, Bitbucket, Azure DevOps. Okay. Like there are different Git or source code repositories. So what people will do is they develop the code and they maintain that code in these repositories. It's more of like a folders. We can call them as in our own terminology, we can call them as a folders. So developers, if they are deploying or maintaining the code in the GitHub, then we can connect an app service to a GitHub, and from GitHub, we can directly deploy the code into the app service. Similarly, we can connect in Azure DevOps, And through Azure DevOps, we can deploy the code into the app service. Okay. Like this, various source code repositories it supports. So one of the method is an FTPS client, where and developers or small workers where they don't have the repository maintained, they have a build files which they want to copy it. They can use an FTPS client, or they can use called as a web deployment, or from the source code repositories. Okay. So in this video, we'll talk about how we can use an FTPS client, and later videos, we will see how we can basically do that. But for now, in this video, I'll focus more on FTPS client. So I'm going to the app service. Let me create an app service. I'm giving acute HRMS, ASP.NET. So I'm selecting new, and probably I'll just go with the basic one CPU with one. So I don't need anything. Review and create. Create. Let me go to the incognito window. So I'm taking this URL, incognito window, paste it. So this is the FTDN provided by Microsoft Azure, and this is the sample application deployed by this thing. Now I want to deploy my own application. So in order to deploy my own application and to push this code into an app service, so I need to enable the FTPS. So go to the settings, configuration, and here we will be able to see called as an FTPS authentication on, and FTP says save it. Okay, so we have the web app settings. FTP is enabled. Let's go to the deployment center, and we would see FTPS credentials. Now this is the URL for this particular app service in order to deploy using the FTPS. And this is a username and password for application scope. I'm using a username and password, so I'm setting my password. Set the password. So now I saved this one. So I'm copying the FTPS client. So let me go to the File Explorer. I have an application, a sample applications. I'm saying landing pages, website to app. This is a small an application which is available. Now I want to copy this application to an app service, or I can say any other page template. Okay, so it's fine, anything. So let me go to the now. I'm using an FTPS. So in order to use that, use any of the FTPS client. So here you see an FTP implication encryption because it is a secure. Go to app service, copy the endpoint URL and paste it here. Username and password. So your username and password will be in the format of your app service. So it will be in the format of app service name dot sorry slash username. So I'm giving it here acute HRMS slash Venkat Bollam. When I go to the app service deployment center, FTP credentials, I see the username and the password, whatever I set. Yeah. Now we would see the remote directory of the app service. There is one file Microsoft has kept. Now let me go to my folder where applications are there. So I'm saying horizontal single page. Select all these files, drag it and drop on the right side, or you can right click and say called as an upload. right? So we moved the files from my local laptop to an app service using an FTPS. Now earlier there was a sample application. Now we deployed our code to the app service. Let's refresh it. We can see altogether a different application is getting displayed. Okay. So on the same, I have a different application now deployed. So this way we can use an FTPS and we can deploy this particular code into the app service.